Okay, staff, we're going to get this meeting started. It's 12:09. I call this meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, January 31st. If we could please get a roll call.
Councilmember Sarmiento?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez?
Present. Great, thank you. Any public comment at this time? Looks like we have no public comment at this time. Now we're going to move to item 1 and elect the chair. Move to elect Councilman Sarmiento.
Madam City Attorney, can I vote for myself? I know we've had this issue before.
Yes, it's not a competition.
No opposition. Okay.
Fantastic. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Take it over.
All right, there we go. We'll give Mayor Pro Tem a chance to have some lunch while I let mine get cold. So let's see. We're moving on to item number 2, which is to review and approve the proposed meeting schedule for this meeting. Thank you for attaching that, staff. I think we have, is it 4 dates for this year? We're meeting quarterly. Let me just go through and see what those dates are. Excuse me, 3. 28th of March, 27th of June, 26th of September of this year. Any opposition to accepting these?
Just on the 27th, because I know we have Naleo, the 23rd to the 24th. I'm not sure if you have to stay an extra day. If we just could take a look at that.
Can we go ahead and adopt with the exception of that date, and we can come back and maybe adjust?
Actually we'll be good. I'm not, yeah. The
good?
27th is a Wednesday.
Okay, so we'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back.
We can keep the date, and if we need to adjust, we can always call a special meeting.
That
Okay.
makes sense. Mayor Pro Tem, you want to move it?
Make a motion to approve?
Second, okay. So that takes care of that. Those dates are fine, thank you. And I'll entertain a motion on the minutes from October 4th of last year.
I guess I have to vote or else you guys won't have a quorum, so I'll go ahead. I wasn't a part of this, but I'll go ahead and move for purposes of approving the minutes.
Thank you, and I know you went through these and combed through them.
Yes, I
and
did.
became familiar with all those, so I'll second that. Moving along to item number 4, and do we, staff, do we have H&K on the line, and is it in preference of having our federal legislative update first and then followed by state?
Yes, that works. They are on the line. We have Leslie Polner and Dan Maldonado on the line.
Leslie and Dan, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year.
Good. Well, listen, we have a newly configured committee, and Mayor Pro Tem and I welcome you guys, and I'll go ahead and give you the floor so you can talk to us about the federal update.
Certainly. So, as you know, last night the President gave his State of the Union speech. It was actually his first official State of the Union speech. And in it, he touched on a number of items that have been having a major impact here at the federal level. He talked about immigration, and as many of you know, we've all been waiting with bated breath to see what kind of solution they will come up with for DACA. In September, as we know, the President announced that he would be winding down the DACA program, and that is set to expire on March 5th. And Democrats have been very hesitant to support any kind of funding package until a DACA fix is established. And it has created all sorts of chaos on multiple levels at the federal level, and then, of course, for everyone's lives that are awaiting to find out what happens. On January 25th, the White House released their immigration framework, which was sort of their latest salvo in this ongoing negotiation. And it did a number of things. It would establish a pathway to citizenship for up to 1.8 million undocumented immigrants. But at the same time, it would make sweeping changes to legal immigration. Most notably, it would curtail immigration from the ability of legal immigrants to sponsor their families, which would be a major departure from existing policy. It would also eliminate the visa lottery program. It also has a number of border security measures. And Democrats have said that this is really a non-starter for them. You've had people like Senator Schumer and Senator Durbin who have really been on the front lines negotiating have said that this is not acceptable, particularly with regard to the family migration piece. I think at this point you're seeing that Democrats are willing to give something on the border security piece, but not on the family migration piece. Where does that leave us?
By the way, just to add that there are a number of Republican members, not a majority, but certainly there is a group of Republican members that share some of that concern around the family reunification side.
So where does this leave us? You've got the program expiring on March 5th. You've got the current continuing resolution that was last passed in January. That is expires February 8th. You've had an attempt by Leader McConnell to try to separate out the spending package from DACA, which has had some success, although we'll see this is going to come to a head again next week. Negotiations on the spending package have been moving ahead, and actually we're moving fairly well, most recently, where the discussion had been how much to increase domestic spending if you were going to increase military spending. And it looked like there was some resolution. Democrats had been pushing to have a 1-to-1 increase. If you did $1 of increase for military, you do $1 of increase for non-military domestic programs. And they had reached a place where they were going to do an $80 billion increase for defense, and then 63. This is a 2-year deal. That, however, has started once again falling apart. Some folks from the Freedom Caucus are getting very uncomfortable with some of the provisions here. And, of course, there's only 3 legislative days left until February 8th because Democrats are going on retreat. So it looks like we're going to wind up with another short-term continuing resolution, at least pushing out probably towards the end of February, which means that you could potentially have, once again, the DACA and the spending issues coming to a head together at the same time. Adding to the complexity here is, of course, the debt ceiling, which was dealt with last year, is now we're beginning to hit on the debt ceiling increase that was passed. They will probably be able to do some extraordinary measures to keep the debt ceiling, but that's going to come to a head as well, and that's always a really contentious issue for Republicans to deal with. So it is not an easy path here. There is a lot of uncertainty right now, and so we're watching this very, very closely because, of course, both the DACA situation and the funding package have major implications for standing and priorities. Dan, anything you want to add there?
Leslie,
I think that was
Dan.
an excellent summary. I do think that part of this unpredictability is, even though I think they are ready to go with some omnibus bill that sort of pulls together all of the appropriation bills, including our transportation items and some of the HUD home investment programs as well. But the problem you have is that if you're going to move that train down the tracks, you better have DACA resolved in a way that doesn't open up for, I would say, more restrictive immigration policy. So I think this is where the battle is, and the question is whether you end up with some kind of temporary fix on DACA in order to try to, keep pushing push the can down the road.
Dan, let me interrupt you just for a second. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So a couple things. I'm not sure if there was a report that was forwarded in writing for us to follow some of the update. If not a big deal. We'll go ahead and go through this verbally. And I kind of wanted to change things, and with Mayor Pro Tem's agreement, what I wanted to do is, as we go through the updates, and this is maybe for TPA's information as well, I'd like to see how all the updates relate to Santa Ana specifically and the issues that we're dealing with. So to the extent that we find the nexus on what's going on with respect to issues like the continuing resolution, how do they relate to, some of our projects in particular, like the streetcar, on immigration, how does that deal with, our issues that we face as a sanctuary city, what sort of exposure we have on some grants, on monies. But I guess I mean, all of us are paying attention to the headlines, and I don't want a restatement of that because that's not a good use of your time nor of ours or staff's. So to the extent we can get more a connection to what Santa Ana is going to experience as a benefit or as a detriment to some of what's being mentioned and done in Washington. So if we can go down, as you go through your update, just kind of tie it to what we have pending before us, that'd be real helpful. So thank you both.
Sure. Well, clearly I think Leslie indicated that certainly on the budget, the transportation streetcar project is a very vital part of what we've been working closely with our delegation, and so that's a top priority to make sure that there's continued funding for the streetcar project, and to do that in coordination with OCTA. And make sure that all aligned in terms of the messaging and the politics of it. So I think that's been a very positive experience, and that we're in a shape for that once an agreement is reached.
And I would just say, in terms of the FY18 spending package, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but I mean, it is literally, it affects everything, funding-wise. At this point, what you're seeing is all of the agencies are putting a hold on releasing grants at this point because they don't know how much funding they're going to have. They don't know for which programs. They don't know what level. And so that's, everything from home to CDBG to, you name COPS funding, you name it. It's all getting held up right now. So it's fairly significant across the board.
Yeah, and other things are popping up. I mean, so clearly something that we made some reference in our notes back with regard to the scorecard and priorities is the 2020 census. And that's a discussion in itself, and the importance of that to the city of Santa Ana is critical as to, an accurate and fair count. And, how do you maximize that? And ensure that Santa Ana gets its fair shake in terms of the federal distribution of funds. So that's an enormous piece here that fits into a larger set of politics and dynamics that is going on. But it's becoming a hot potato.
Well, I know they're now going to be requiring a lot less, or the threshold is a lot lower on questions that are asked of folks, and so.
Well, and there's still this question about whether the Department of Justice request to add a citizenship status question is going to be accepted or not. Clearly, that would create all kinds of detrimental sort of fear-grabbing kinds of reaction from our community, our immigrant communities. So I think we've got some serious issues there. But even the online survey effort that the census is experimenting with, that they're going to rely on to keep so-called the cost of the 2020 census down is a big deal. I mean, and how do we make sure that our folks are able to respond online? So I think there's a lot of questions here, and we need to do some follow-up on that with regard to how the city works with the Census Bureau in the field.
Well, that was, I think, a question that, I know Mayor Pro Tem was mentioning, and both of us are members of NALEO, and that's probably their priority issue for this year, is making sure that there's pushback on the very diluted requirements now that the census takers are going to have. We're already a difficult-to-count community, and
exactly.
It's going to be even made more difficult now with these loose regs. Mayor Pro Tem.
Right, you should be one of the count. You should. They're supposed to be working with you on putting together these coordinating committees, and providing technical assistance. I don't know if there's been any discussion at all, but if there has not, that we should be on the horn to the delegation to make sure that it begins to happen.
Dan, this is Michelle Martinez. Hope all is well with you. Quick question for you. For me, and I was just mentioning Councilman Sarmiento, that a lot of this doesn't really have to do with money, even though it's important for us. What this is really about, it's about redistricting. This is what this is about. And they found their angle. And we need to be smarter. And, this is why I've been having conversations with Naleo, because they wanted my perspective. And I'm like, yes, we got to count everyone, but you have to remember, this is not about dollars. That's what we're thinking about. This is about redistricting, and this is their opportunity to make sure that they take seats away from us. If they take that's what's more detrimental to us. And so we need to keep that in mind. At the same time, for us to gather the data, beyond just the federal, from the state level, all the way down to the local level, we're going to have to collaborate and coordinate. And the MPO plays a major role in getting data. And so the partnership that we play with SCAG is going to be vital for us because of all the data and information that they do have. And they're already in preparation, as many cities are trying to get moving. They're working with the feds already, trying to, get ready to get all this information, as they're already contacting all the cities as it pertains to their regional transportation plan and the sustainable community strategy. We have SCAG staff in every city, 191 cities in 6 counties, gathering this data right now. And so how we partner is going to be vital with the MPOs. And so I just wanted to share that with you all, those 2 notes.
You're absolutely right, City Councilwoman. There's no question. Actually, it's a double whammy because, yes, constitutionally, the apportionment of seats is critical. And, of course, in California, there's a question about, well, do we hold a seat or do we lose a seat? And, where does it go and how do we make sure it doesn't go? But the other thing is that if you then depress the actual count, then the money that should be coming to California and to the cities directly all of a sudden is much lower. And so even without a change in the overall budget numbers, you have an impact as to how much the city of Santa Ana gets. So I think we get hit with a double whammy from that perspective.
What are your suggestions, Dan?
Partnerships, I think what you're suggesting is very important.
So how can you help us track and monitor? Because I know, as Councilman Sarmiento mentioned, a summary wasn't provided as a report. And I was talking to our city manager about this. Is it possible, based on our recommendation here, and I know we have a draft as it pertains to our 28 state and federal legislative platform, this is a lot, and it's all based on our 5-year strategic plan. Obviously, we're not going to be able to accomplish all of this work, but on some important things that really matter for us moving forward, I think we need to identify where we can help monitor and come back to this committee so that we can then report out to the entire mayor and city council. Obviously, the meeting minutes of this committee, they're not that try to be nice about it, very detailed. And so we want to make sure before we present, this platform and this legislative platform, that they understand why we're choosing going in a different direction and setting some key priorities that will be very important for the city, that we actually have some wins by the end of the year versus just continuing to monitor and really not get anywhere. I think there are some important things that we do want to talk about that I'll pass back to Councilman Sarmiento so we can start that conversation from the federal level, then we can get to the state level based on the platform.
Right. We will have action steps related to the census piece. We're, Leslie and I have a series of meetings and discussion here in D.C. around some of these sort of the policy side as well as the agency side and come back with some action items.
And we appreciate that, Dan. I think that's going to make our time a lot more, effective, and I think we're going to have better results. The problem is that, we now want to have these committees have a lot more value, right? We have staff here, we have time and resources being expended, we have our advocates and our lobbyists that are here. They're trying to help us, and again, we can't. Because the Mayor Pro Tem and I are so senior, we have no excuse to say we don't know how these things function. So we really do want to squeeze as much value out of our time. And because we meet quarterly, it's very precious, right, that we move this along. So, and I agree. I think the draft, scorecard is great. There's a lot there. I think we need to maybe and this is for staff's direction as well, or direction to staff. I think what you want to hear from us and what our responsibility is to say, okay, here are some things that we really do need to focus a lot of attention on, or else you're going to be all over the place and you have no direction. That's not fair to you. And I think that, the burden and the onus is on us to identify those time-sensitive problems that are before us that we can, address. And we not disregard the others, but we realize that there are some more pressing issues. So,
I think one other issue I just want to make sure it's on everyone's radar actually also has to do with marijuana. As most of you know, AG Sessions rescinded the Cole memo, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment about what that's going to mean for states like California that have legalized marijuana. There is now, historically, there has been an amendment that's been added into the appropriations bill that essentially says DOJ federal funds cannot be used to prosecute legal medical marijuana establishments. Mm-hmm. There is now an effort afoot to try to broaden that so that it would be legalized marijuana generally. And so you have an amendment actually being offered right now by McClintock and Polis, and then Senator Gardner and Senator Murray on the Senate side are also very interested in looking at this language, and of course, know that that has a real impact for Santa Ana as well. So want to make sure that that's on your radar.
No, that's really helpful. And look, the only things, I'll go ahead and toss it back as well to Mayor Pro Tem, but some of the things I think, we spoke about, immigration's obviously, important. It's good to get a broad sense of, what's happening with, proposed compromise or some sort of reform. But, monies that that we could potentially lose as a result of our sanctuary city status, those things, with respect to litigation that's pending, with respect to, us being on a list of targeted cities, all those things are real important. Again, I saw that, we didn't receive any COPS money last year in 2017, but it looks like we did receive some UASI money. So, that's good to know, and thank you for your help and work on that on the UASI end, and I'm sure you made an attempt on the COPS, and that we know we're dealing with a different administration, and that's leads me to the next one. We're dealing with a real severe and serious homelessness crisis, and I know that my conversations with HUD when the former administration was there was to have the local cities have a better or have a seat at the table on how the funds were allocated and dedicated. So, I don't have a lot of optimism, this time around for that to happen. But that was a goal back then to see how we can, have more of a role and more of a voice on how those monies are expended. So, those are just a few things. I'm sure Michelle has some others, but that's kind of the thing that I want us to be able to do. So when we report out to the full council, they realize that there's some work, some progress, and some real, value again to the time that we're spending together. So,
great.
Mayor Pro
Yeah,
Tem.
thank you, Councilman Sarmiento. So for me, just to start off, what I would like to see beyond what I'm going to be based on priorities at the federal level, but more so for both our lobbyists at the federal and state level, I'd like to see a monthly report that is provided to us that would give us updates on legislations. So basically monitoring some of our top priorities and where they're at in the pipeline. If they've passed, they're not passed, it's going into the next legislative session. And then as well, the city continues to push for grants, and so we can, get a list in that report of grants that are available at the federal or state level, is what I would like to be included in that report. And then again, based on our platform, some of the updates on the issues and where we're at on those. And so I'll go down the list, and I agree that immigration is important. I just wanted to include on the immigration, and I've talked to our city attorney about session and holding the elected officials accountable and possibly, wanting to come and arrest us because we're a sanctuary city. Where are we at with that? And what precautions should we take as elected officials? And at any moment in time, do we direct our city attorney to help us, put a memo together that would indicate that if they do come and arrest us, that the city would ultimately, cover these expenses to defend us. And so, I've said it from the very beginning when we became a sanctuary city that I was very, scared over, the tactics of who we were dealing with, and obviously. They're starting to show, their hand, and I think it's only going to get worse, not better, as longer that they're there. And then the other issue that I brought up that I think is important, and I've been talking to the business communities. We talk about immigration. We've never had a ceremony. So a ceremony that can be brought here, a citizenship ceremony, and I've asked our staff to inquire about that. They've asked me to possibly bring an 85A. I wanted to bring it here, wanted to get your input as well, Dan and Leslie, what those requirements are, what that possibly would cost, how can we partner up with NALE or others. I know that we've seen these ceremonies happen in Los Angeles and San Francisco and Chicago, all over the place, and the business merchants in particular are the ones that requested it, that they would like to have it on Calle to symbolize, our support for immigration reform, but more importantly, making sure that we're able to provide something like this. And we know that it's not just for Santa Ana residents; it's it's for the region, and so something that we can look at as it pertains to immigration. The second part for me. As Councilman Sarmiento talked about homelessness, and he doesn't really have much hope. I'm trying to keep the hope alive here. And so I would just encourage us at the federal and state level, ways that we can actually navigate law and funding and figure out ways that we could have pilot programs and work with our congressional members or our senators to look at mental health funds and drug prevention funds, because those funds currently now don't trickle down to the local level, to local municipalities. They trickle down to the state. State then gives those to the county. And so the county, obviously, and many throughout the state are really not doing their job, and the onus has been put kind of on us. And so I would just hope that if we could establish a pilot program and working with our congressional members or senators and figure out what we can do to receive some of those dollars at the local level so that we can tie them with the housing that we're trying to provide for the homeless population. And then my third for me is innovation. And I know that we have a huge legislative platform, but I wanted to make sure that we focus on infrastructure as it pertains, and our staff had put it down here, but I just wanted to articulate the importance of cybersecurity and the funding that's really not being, brought to the local level. And I had a question, and I mentioned it to our city manager and to our city attorney, if we could use UASI funding for cybersecurity. And I'm assuming they've already probably briefed Jorge. Just let me wrap up, and then you guys could go ahead and ask. And so I wanted to see if we can do that, because obviously our chief innovation officer and the city doesn't dedicate much funding to IT, and cybersecurity is a big issue. The second one is wanting to make sure we continue to bridge the digital divide, and we're going to need that infrastructure which is a fiber network, which we all know that much money is not being invested at the federal level or at the state level to local municipalities as we move towards the digital revolution. And we need to prepare ourselves because this is the new normal for us. And more importantly, I just want to just end with this: as we have our streetcar coming, and you all have been advocating at the federal level in partnership with OCTA. You know, it just seems that it's just a form of getting its ridership and that streetcar going down its corridor. But it would be awesome if we can follow the leadership of Cincinnati in doing a smart streetcar. OCTA doesn't have the funding to provide Wi-Fi on its streetcar. If we can find ways to help accommodate that and partner up with them, that we have a smart streetcar. Cincinnati moved in that direction, and I believe we need to as well. And that's what I'll just end. And then the last thing is the census. I do agree that it's imperative that we have a game plan at the federal level, and that's pretty much what I'm focused on right now, just at the federal level, that I wanted to share with you all.
Thank you. And so, for staff and for you, Dan and Leslie, I hope that's helpful. Where everything in the scorecard is important, and on our platform is important. So I appreciate staff being thorough. Mm-hmm. But I think what we're trying to do is distill it a little bit more, and to make sure our resources are used intelligently, and we're more effective. And again, the census issue is something we kind of see that bubbled up, and we realize is going to be a problem, and it's going to be an issue. So to the extent that we can continue to check in on those, maybe a little bit more. Maybe the monthly isn't as detailed, but it addresses some of the things that I think you heard from the committee, and you may hear from the council once we report. So when we report
and there's enough action items that I think the councilwoman went through that actually we have been working on and have also some answers on, and we can do all that follow up to make sure that we're keeping everything the issues current. And if there needs to be, some change in the action or strategy, that we've, have talked that through.
So one last thing before we wrap up on this, and I failed to mention to everybody that Mayor Pro Tem has to be in Los Angeles at 3 p.m. So I'm going to be trying to wrap up here at 1:30. So that's sort of the deadline, and hopefully traffic will help. It'll help Mayor Pro Tem get there on time. But I know the new federal tax law included something called opportunity zones, which is similar to the old enterprise zones. To the extent that's something that we could take advantage of, and maybe include on your list of to-dos for us and follow-up for us, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and there's two parts. We did an alert that covers two parts. One is the actual process that each state has to go through, and the second is the actual establishment of the Opportunity Fund. And so we're going to put that information together, get it over to you, and then, we have in-house counsel that also has pretty much reads this pretty closely because they've been involved with new market tax credits as well. And so there's similarities between the two, also differences in terms of the broader aspects of the opportunity zones. So it definitely is something that the city should be looking at seriously.
Dan, on that note as well, I've been, pushing our city and working and wanting to thank Judson as we continue to send them various emails as it pertains to home ownership. And, our first-time buyer program, wanting to keep that on your guys' alert. If there's any new legislation that's being presented as it pertains to home ownership, in particular lending, the city right now has a $40,000 loan for first-time home buyers. Qualifications is $499,000. Obviously, we don't meet the mark. Pretty much most of our residents, we got to relook at that criteria. But obviously, there's challenges at the federal level as it pertains to lending, and how do we are able to either work in concert with those lenders, with the Realtors Association, of California and the nation, to figure out ways of how we can promote home ownership. That is going to continue to be a major problem, not only across this country, country, but California, as we continue to move in the direction of being a renter state versus owner, and that has major implications at the local level, as the majority of the resources that we generate is either through property tax or sales tax. And obviously,
Right.
sales tax is changing drastically, and so is property tax now. And so we need to prepare ourselves and figure out strategies at the federal level of how they can actually help us in making sure that we continue to promote home ownership.
Great. Well, thank you. I think Dan and Leslie, you guys have your marching orders, and hopefully we gave you a little bit more clarity as to what our goals and priorities are in the immediate future. And I think what will be helpful for us here and staff is that when we report out to council, the summary of the minutes or the summary of maybe some of the issues that we discussed, we can go ahead and report out. And by the way, I want to welcome our new recording secretary. It's her maiden voyage, Rosa Flores. So I hope we're not speaking too fast. We'll try to slow it down, but we're trying to hit a deadline. So
Thank you.
So thank you, Dan and Leslie, and we'll look forward to following up with you.
Okay, great. It was great talking with you guys.
Great.
So now we move on to the state legislative update, and I see Mr. Chris Townsend from Townsend Public Affairs is here and is probably going to kick it off for us. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and the Vice Chairwoman, and we will keep our presentation brief. We do provide a written report, and we'll continue to keep the theme about relevance to Santa Ana. We have no problem providing a monthly update, and as you know, particularly Sacramento, because things move so quickly. Working with Jorge and your team has been great. Really strong working relationship. Really excited about it. So with that, I'm going to have with me today is our State Capitol Director, Casey Elliott, who will lead the report. He's joined by the Director of the TPA Southern California Office, Corey Williams, who will also be able to add some insight. And, of course, ready to answer any questions.
Good afternoon. Right, afternoon. I'm going to start actually just on a couple of items that were touched on federal and then kind of work it around. On the last item, opportunity zones, I had a chance last week to sit down with GoBiz Executive Director Avdis to talk about the opportunity zone program and kind of the process that the state was going to be looking at. Through the federal legislation, the state is being tasked with identifying all of the census tracts that are eligible. When I was talking with GoBiz, they think there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 3,100 eligible districts. They're still trying to reconcile with the Department of Finance of exactly who qualifies. The state will then be able to select up to 25% of those qualifying tracts to be designated as opportunity zones. Under the federal legislation, their timeline is March 22nd to identify those, although the state is allowed one 30-day extension, just kind of based on where they seemed like the state was at when last week. I think it's a pretty safe guess that they'll be taking that 30-day extension. They were still trying to figure out, I think Finance had one number of eligible tracts, GoBiz had another number, and then HCD had a number that was just not reconcilable by the other two. So their recommendation, though, was cities that are interested in applying. If you feel like you can identify your own census tracts, sending GoBiz a letter of what those tracts are. Any kind of eligible other relevant data. I think one of the things the state is going to struggle with is essentially from the federal tax bill, it was just a set of criteria, and do you apply or not necessarily how the state should prioritize who gets a zone, any type of ranking. So we talked about things like including data from CalEnviroScreen or any other, air quality, poverty, other quality of life issues that may help GoBiz in making that decision. I spoke with city staff about that last week, so that's something that hopefully we have in the process here, and we're happy to help with GoBiz, however we can be helpful. In kind of regards to just a couple of things in Sacramento, one is just more of a general theme that may may be applicable to the city as we kind of get further into the legislative session, but want to touch on it now is obviously the issue of sexual harassment was prevalent in Sacramento in November, December, still in January. The legislature's holding hearings. They're basically looking to revamp the entire way that the state legislature handles harassment, allegations, investigations, things along those lines. I think that it's probably long overdue in the Capitol. That said, as Sacramento tends to do, whenever they look at rules for themselves, they also look at rules for other people. So we're definitely seeing legislation that's already been introduced. I anticipate that we're going to see more legislation introduced. We currently have legislation that would require additional training for public employees. There's legislation that's been introduced that would extend civil liability under existing statute to elected officials, to lobbyists, to a whole host of other folks. But I think for this room, those are probably the two main ones. There's also legislation that's been introduced that would make elected officials personally liable for covering any costs that their employer does as a result of sexual harassment or harassment, settlements, payments, those types of things. Since we're still early in the legislative session, those bills haven't really moved through, but obviously they do. Those ones could particularly have some impact on local governments, local elected officials. Like I said, I anticipate we'll see more legislation as we get closer to the bill introduction deadline. From a big picture, right now the Assembly has had 3 members resign. 2 were directly related to allegations of sexual harassment, and then another member has resigned due to health reasons. So whereas last year the Assembly had a 2/3 vote, they could pass urgency bills, tax measures, put items on the ballot without any bipartisan support. That is no longer the case. Those 3 seats are up for election in April, and then if runoffs are needed, those will be consolidated with June. So in theory, the Democrats could have a 2/3 majority back for the second half of the session. Given the demographics of those districts, I think it's pretty likely that Democrats will retain those seats. On the Senate side, you technically still have a 2/3 majority, though Senator Tony Mendoza is currently on a requested extension of his voluntary leave for up to another 60 days. So they don't have 2/3 voting members right now. And then also the recall election of Senator Newman will be in June. So unclear if the Senate will ever at any point have a functioning 2/3 supermajority this session. So obviously that just impacts what bills can make it through the legislature.
Casey, before you go on, I just had a quick question for our city attorney. So does our municipal code, as it references workplace environment, do we defer to the state on those issues? Do we have our own internal codes that govern, harassment cases, hostile work environments? If we don't, are we thinking about adding those, or where are we on that locally?
Well, we do have a harassment policy.
Can you put your...
I'm so sorry. The city, our charter doesn't speak to these issues, but we do have a harassment policy. It was updated, I think, within the last 2 years to address a small issue. I actually just recently spoke with the city manager about the concept of bringing in someone to do kind of a best practices review of all of those items, just as we've recently done in another department, because I do believe that we need to do that. It's been a while, and that would be the recommendation. So we do have some policies that are guiding us right now. I think that we could improve on some of those policies.
Do we have a disclosure policy on relationships, subordinate?
There's been a draft, I understand, that's been prepared by staff, and I'm not aware of the status. You might
So
want to ask
maybe
the
we
manager.
can bring that back. That's, potential legislation. I think it could be governed under the purview of this committee, at least for us to be able to push it through and bring it to the council. But I think it's timely, and I think, if the state's moving on it, we know they're headed in that direction. We've had an incident in our past here for us, and a couple. So, to the extent that we sit on our hands any longer doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I get that we all have to get the training, but that's everybody. But I think our city in particular have had such specific contacts with that issue that we should have some remedy that has been drafted, or at least some.
What I found
codes.
interesting is that when I made the recommendation to the manager, actually just earlier this week, we were talking about it. I had mentioned to him that I had seen in the context of another city that had just recently done exactly what you're speaking to. They were a little in front of us on it. And we had identified someone that might fit us, might be able to do it, as that individual has been doing this for a number of other cities in the last few months. So
We can't do that in-house, like just bringing best practices before us? I mean, is it something that we have to have an outside consultant come in? I just don't want this to be the Full Employment Act for consultants, so,
well,
We sure do have a lot.
sorry.
Right. No, I think we would benefit from an outsider's perspective who has done this for other cities, and we actually both thought of the same person. So that was actually good to hear from me that our city attorney has the same high regard.
Okay. Well, look, I have such confidence in our staff that I know that they're very capable. I rarely meet people that are out from the outside that are more capable than us, so that's why I defer to you guys.
Just very quickly on that issue, is there a way for employees, if they feel that there's a hostile work environment or sexual harassment has occurred, how do they report that? That is confidential and anonymous if they so choose to do that?
yeah, so we do have the policy that we have does address the issue. However, as you know, while an individual can come into an environment and can make a complaint, where we find that it is a complaint that needs to be investigated, we must investigate. So at that point, it's always kind of a little difficult challenge because someone might come in.
But what
just
is
to
that
talk.
process, I guess? For me, everything needs to be documented. What is that process to get there? So
How you report it, right?
for example, you know, at SCAG, we have that. We have a someone where they can call in and they want to put in a complaint. After that, there's a committee that I'm on that committee with the president and the other board. Those issues are being brought to us with our outside counsel and says, look, this is the situation. Outside counsel recommends, I think you need to go and hire an outside person to do this investigation. How long do you want this to be? It's anonymous, you know, we don't know who this is, but if it's someone concrete, then, you know, how long do you want to wrap this up? We said, you know, we want this done in 1 month. Come back to us because it could cost money, right? It could be costly. And then bring back the information based on our harassment policy. Did they violate the ethics? Did they violate the sexual harassment? And then we take steps to terminate, recommend termination, recommend suspension, on and so forth.
So
And
my
that's what I'm
understanding
looking
is that
for.
currently in this city, given the way the city has functioned organizationally, each department has a process that they've used.
Oh, no.
My office has prepared a very detailed process along with written samples and examples of letters to be used, and that material was presented to our personnel department. Once I take that step and present that information to the department, it really becomes an issue that I have to then turn over to the city manager.
So I'd like to make a recommendation that, you know, city manager and yourself come and bring back all these certain policies for the various agencies, put them together, make a recommendation of one policy that can come before this committee to recommend, and then set, you know, something, you know, out publicly with the rest of the city council to take action. Because ultimately, I get that, you know, as a city manager and city attorney, that you all, you know, help move forward with investigations. But ultimately, when something major does happen, it doesn't fall on you. It falls on this council, right? Just what's happening at the legislature. It's you know, they can't,
Staff, right?
they can't say, well, it's staff. No, they have to take full responsibility.
And I actually
so we need to move in that
recommended,
direction.
in my experience in some other cities, what we've done is we actually have a policy that is applicable to the electeds and appointeds, because that's usually where the most difficult challenges occur, because, you know, they're the ones that are in charge, and how do you do that? So I've also recommended to staff that we have a policy that we present, you know, and that way there's no question. We comply with the rules as they're written.
Well, thank you, and I apologize for taking us on this tangent, but I see that later on in the agenda, our last item talks about the code of conduct. So maybe that is the vehicle where we introduce some of this language and some of these terms, and maybe working with our state legislative advocates, they can lead us down the path of where the state is looking at, and, you know, in conjunction with maybe having a person come in and speak to us and, you know, advise us a little bit more. But, you know, look, it is something timely, and you know, I know that there's some mention of tightening up the code of conduct and ethics. That's fine, but there's a lot more things that need to go in it. So it's not ripe, it's not ready to go. This sexual harassment issue, the hostile workplace environment language, really needs to be part of that policy. So let me bring it back to you, Casey. Sorry about that. But you brought up a sort of a hot topic.
No, not at all. I did also want to speak about the state budget. A couple weeks ago on the 10th, the governor rolled out his proposal for the January budget, which you'll recall is kind of a loose framework based on the revenue estimates that we know in basically at the end of December. There'll be a revised version of the budget put out in May, which will be much closer to the final version of the budget. But the January budget obviously provides us an idea of where the governor wants to go, where the administration wants to go, what their priorities are for his final year in office. The budget it does reflect $131 billion worth of general fund expenditures, which is a $5.1 billion increase over last year. So there's still some modest growth going on in the economy. Really, the Governor Brown's kind of continuing his trends of being cautious, trying to prepare the state for an inevitable economic downturn. The budget fully funds the state's rainy day fund. It's an additional $5.1 billion into the rainy day fund this year, which is $2.5 billion more than is required under law. So there may be some debates as to where to best spend that $2.5 billion in the legislature. But for now, the governor's proposing to fully fund the state's rainy day fund. A couple of items of note that we've been working on the last couple of years that we're seeing come to fruition in this year's budget. The governor has programmed out $4.5 billion in additional transportation funding that's now online due to the increases that were passed as part of SB 1. That amount will continue to grow in the coming years as gas tax gets indexed, as some more of the vehicle registration fees for electric vehicles come on board. But for now, the proposal is $4.5 billion split between the state and locals. Of the local money, just under $1.2 billion of it goes down to local streets and roads. So that'll come to the city through I guess what used to be the HUDA formula. It's the new gas tax formula. So that'll be coming through. Additional funding, I think Corey has some more information, going through a number of state programs that I think the city is very familiar with and has been very competitive with in the past. Also coming online this year, we have some new funding for affordable housing, which was as part of SB 2, which was the $75 fee for real estate recordings. The way that the legislature structured the finances for SB 2, the first year the money is largely stays at the local level, at the state level. 70% of it stays at the state. However, I think of that 70%, 50% is to be used for technical assistance for local governments to help them get general plans, all kind of planning documents in place and ready. And then next year we go to a 50-50 state-local split. So the city will start getting direct allocations of funding based on the federal CDBG funding formula. So again, the city will start getting direct funding from that, and that's really pretty broad categories of dealing with affordable housing and homelessness. Also this year, we should see a wrap-up of the court cases on the No Place Like Home funding, so that will be coming online. That obviously runs through the county, but additional, that's probably the SB2 funding and the No Place Like Home funding, I think, are really going to be the main sources of funding for affordable housing and homelessness from the state. There is some discussion about additional affordable housing bills this year. However, I think those are going to be more policy related and not so much funding related. We're already seeing big discussions about rent control, about dealing with homeless youth. So I think that we're going to see a lot of bills over the next month that are kind of introduced on housing and homelessness.
Casey, on that homeless money, does that money go to the county and then to us as a pass-through through them, or does it come directly to the
No Place Like Home money goes to the county, and I believe the county has a plan in place. I think Judson probably is familiar with the local plan, but yeah, that goes to the county for a regional plan to be put into place, and then that will be funding over, I think, the period of another 5 years. So that was how that one's done. The SB2 money, once that kicks online next year on its regular funding formula, then that will have a direct allocation to the city.
I did want to add that the Big 11 right now is looking to have someone carry legislation. Right now it's looking like it's going to be Atkins, who potentially is interested in carrying legislation for a state match directly to cities. So whatever cities put as part of their CDBG, ESG, or other dollars would be a dollar-for-dollar match using state general fund dollars. So rather than putting all of the money towards bringing down unfunded liabilities at the state level, some of that would go directly to cities, with the exception of San Francisco being city and county, but everything else would go directly to cities. So the Big 11 is trying to carry that.
Big 11. I didn't hear that.
They used to be the Big 10. Santa Ana fell into 11, so they accommodated us, and they're calling it the Big 11.
Aren't we in a tie? Isn't it still like, kind of, we swapped that 10th spot?
We do with Anaheim. We do play back and forth. So
it's that undercount.
It's undercount, right?
Number 8 or 7.
All right, well, that's good to know. I think that, whatever we can do to push legislation like that'll come to us directly, because even if there is money going through No Place Like Home, look, we're pretty frustrated here that the need is here and it's obvious. It can't be any more blatant and and visible, but we just don't seem to be able to get a seat at that table. So.
Two other quick items just on the state budget. One, and it does go to kind of some of the, obviously the governor's budget doesn't factor in legislative priorities. I think the legislature is going to look at things like the extra $2.5 billion for the rainy day fund, as well as some federal, the governor's budget doesn't really take into account the full action of federal action. For example, it was prepared before the federal tax bill was enacted. So there's going to be questions as may revise. How does that change? It was done assuming that the state would have to chip in $600 million, no pun intended, for the CHIP program, which now is no longer the case. So the state will likely have some additional funding at the May revise or even before to move on some of these legislative priorities. The incoming pro tem Atkins has been a huge champion of affordable housing, so I fully anticipate that she will want to move some affordable housing stuff. As we had mentioned, the Big 11 are working on a proposal with the incoming pro tem's office right now. So I think there'll be movement on that front. Just difficult to tell how much of it's going to be new state dollars being committed. And then the last one, just because we talked about it earlier, while there wasn't a lot of detail proposed in the governor's budget, he did include $20 million for census preparation. So working with there's really not a lot of details fleshed out, but the state has kind of noticed, like, all right, the census is coming up. We need to make sure, to the Mayor Pro Tem's point, we don't want to lose any representation. The state needs to make it a priority. So at least in the governor's budget, there was a $20 million set aside for technical assistance for preparation in advance of the census. Couple of other just quick items. Cannabis, obviously, we're a month into to adult use. The state is still working on getting out licenses, kind of getting everything going. From the administration's point of view, they did not propose any new changes as part of the budget. In our discussions with them 5 months before the final budget is due, they do not anticipate any policy changes to cannabis as part of the budget trailer bill process. They have done cannabis trailer bills each of the last 2 years, so this is somewhat of a different approach for them. That said, the regulations that are in place are under emergency regulations. They know that they're going to have to come back and do permanent regulations, so they still want to hear about any issues, any implementation issues that are going on. They want to collect that data, but then if it's appropriate, they may incorporate that into whatever permanent regulations they move forward kind of once everything's died down. The legislature, obviously, again, there's still another month to go till we hit bill introduction deadline, but I think we've already seen 3 bills that would deal with some form of banking. Treasurer Chung has talked about wanting to put a proposal forward as well, so I think we're going to see an attempt at some level of banking, whether it's a state bank or some other workaround. I think that topic has some traction and will likely be pursued this year.
Casey, is anybody talking about any language to include or to codify the social equity part of the whole process? I know that locals have to do this on their own, and they're all over the place. Some are very aggressive, some are completely lenient. So is there maybe a way to have some consistency? Is there any way you can talk to whoever is drafting or authoring some of that legislation?
Yeah, I know with some of the Bay Area members, Assemblymember Bonta has been very interested in kind of the social equity, revisiting some people that have a criminal history, kind of how can we, under the new framework with that. So I think that there will be discussions and legislation in that arena, which obviously we'll keep an eye on, and any, obviously any input that we can have into those, we can do that.
Well, the governor, are they still going to be taxing at 70% or 80%, wherever they're at, and for how many years?
Prop 64 had a tax structure in place, so obviously under the recreational portion, they have to go under the Prop 64.
Correct.
The state hasn't talked yet about any kind of additional fees or taxes that they would layer on top of that.
Well, it's already high.
I was just saying, yeah.
Well, how much more? What's the city going to get?
I mean, there's always discussions. I mean, I think a lot of people now are looking at, okay, well, we want funding for X. Can we use cannabis as a new revenue stream? So those discussions are going on. How far they'll get in an election year with an outgoing governor, I don't know, and that is where some of the things like the 2/3 vote come into place. Even though it's cannabis, I don't necessarily know how many Republicans in an election year are going to want to vote for increase in taxes of any kind. So there's chatter, but I haven't heard anything real serious yet at this point.
And there was conversation about grant funding from the state to deal with cannabis.
Yes.
Are you going to talk about that? And
Yes.
then what's that funding for? Obviously,
Sure.
Best practice, from Santa Ana's perspective on the medicinal. There was this perception that we were going to make all this money. The reality is, in return, we've had to use the money that we've made to enforce the law, right? And so, really, there wasn't really no huge surplus left over for us to do programming into our general fund. And so, as you look at recreational or adult use, however you want to call it, the reality is that we're now getting illegal shops popping up because they think they can do it, and so we're using our resources from law enforcement to stop that. And so, at what point is the state going to be helping local municipalities to help support that effort so we can keep some of that money to do youth programs and all the other stuff that my colleague said that they're saying that we're going to get that we're really not getting?
Okay. So there has been a question we've discussed before, the public safety grants. Those are coming. They're probably coming in 19 because the revenue to fund those grants didn't come online until January 1st when the recreational was approved. So that is likely going to be, it wasn't included as part of January's budget. So my guess is they're probably going to wait and program out a full year of it in the 1920 budget as opposed to programming out a half year of it in the current budget. There was a question, and I think there still is a question regarding cultivation, because there's language in Prop 64 that is, let's just say, ambiguous. I know that we've talked with the city about if a municipality bans outdoor cultivation, does that still leave you eligible to receive the public safety grants? I know that now we're kind of getting further into this. This has been an issue in Sacramento County and various other municipalities across the state. People are looking at it. The word that we've got from the administration is kind of, let us get through the kind of all the rush of the licensing. We know it's an issue. We acknowledge it's an issue, and it'll probably need to be cleaned up either through the permanent regulations or through some type of legislation, just depending upon the exact timing. So the administration's aware. I think that from everyone that we've spoken with, including the proponents of Prop 64, the legislators, members of the administration, I don't think it's anyone's intent that an outdoor cultivation, while allowing indoor cultivation, would make one ineligible for these grants. I think they all understand in urban settings across the state, this is going to be an issue, if for no other reason, just for space and safety and some of those things. So the main grants that people are looking at are those public safety grants. And like I said, at least as of right now, they're looking at programming that out through next year's budget. And then the last thing, just being respectful of time, I did want to mention, though, a kind of a carryover issue from last year that we're seeing pop up on the federal level. I think it's going to be a state issue again, is SB 649, wireless infrastructure. Based on the governor's veto message of 649 last year, I anticipate in the next month or so we're going to see something new. Obviously, there's been movement on the federal level. Chris, I don't know if you might have more information.
Just real brief, it came out recently that the President's National Security Council, amongst other things, raised the issue of should they look at almost federalizing the transmission infrastructure for all the new 5G network that needs to be installed, which raised a lot of hackles. Some of us, me included, could see cynically, is this a rationale? Has the telecom industry done a great job working over the president, who is a developer and has that perspective, which is this a way to almost use the guise of national security to have a federal preemption of state and local siting and permitting of towers? I don't have obviously any direct evidence that's where it's going, but that's something to watch. And then to see if that starts to move, what does the state do? And how would that be consistent or not with what they might try to do with 649 and maybe be used if you're really trying to push for local control? Does that change the way the state approaches things? Just be something to watch. I know you have your federal advocate that should be tracking that for you.
Yeah. And just moving forward, as we move forward with our fiber optics network, plan that we're going out with a consultant, again, it's going to be imperative for local municipalities to have its own network that it can then partner up with the private sector to provide low-cost internet service, broadband, not just only to government, to our residents, but to the private sector. We have to move towards that direction. Obviously, with the federal government, coming, at all, they're just coming after us. Whether it's the feds now, it's the state's been coming after local control. It's kind of what happened. We're in a very precarious position, as being local government. The way we were very limited in how we could generate revenue. And then we have all these laws that are mandating us from the federal and state level that really don't give us enough room, much to breathe, to do much anymore. And so I don't even know why we even exist. At this point, that's where we're coming to, is that why do we even exist? It's kind of coming to that point, and it's pretty scary, that they're moving in that direction.
So Casey, you wrapped up.
Yep.
Anything else? Anything further from you all? Well, listen, thank you for that. I just wanted to end by saying, look, things are maybe bleak at the state. They're even more bleak federally for us, right? So we really are going to lean on you pretty heavy. And, and this is to staff. Again, let's work very closely with TPA and seeing opportunities that you all can identify for us, whether it's, bills, legislation, grants, bills that we can support and maybe we can initiate that are important to us. One of the things, and I don't know how we start this, but it's been a discussion, again, around homelessness, is that because we're the county seat, because we have the jail here, because we have other, government facilities, we've been a dumping ground for many reasons and for many folks, whether they're homeless, whether they're early releases, whatever the case is. But that's never been tracked well. It's always been, empirical. It's always been sort of, we know what's going on, but, I don't think it's ever been tracked as well as we could and document well. So maybe that's one, but again, we'll leave it up to you to look at that and other things that you can bring to the committee that you could say, look, this is something that's ripe for Santa Ana. You guys, have good standing for this issue. Let's, get this moving. Maybe we work with Assemblymember Daley, others that can help us. But, I just want us to be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive, right? So we've been listening. We've been, distilling a lot of the information. But, we just have to at some point say, okay, we need to kind of start this, start an effort here. Finally, I know I'm going to be in Sacramento the latter part of February on behalf of the Water District. We're going to have a floor presentation. So I'll see if I can coordinate. Maybe I can coordinate with staff. I'm going to do some things with them in the morning, obviously that ceremonial thing, but I can do some afternoon visits if we have to on some of the other pending, priorities that we have. So, I just want to make good use of our time and, maybe a visit from Mayor Pro Tem, whether our city manager goes up or whether you see that as something that's helpful, let us know. But we just need to be, again, a little bit more active on this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, three just things for me, on the homeless, just, on Councilman Sarmiento. Is there a possible way legislation for county seats that having to deal with the, homeless problem, we don't receive any funding, so that possibly can be kind of a nexus to talk to either Daley or Janet Wynn in figuring out how can we get an extra carve of funding to address the homeless, since we are a county seat, and obviously most of the money is going to the county, not coming to us to address certain issues. So trying to take a look at that from that perspective, we've got to be creative. And then the second part would be, as we look at active transportation and the funding in the next cycle that's coming is the largest cycle that we will see, and they're wrapping up on all the guidelines and hoping they'll come out soon. But most of the funding, when we have to go through our RFP process to go and get the consultants to build, takes pretty long time. And so how can we figure out or work with some legislators to figure out how, we're gonna, if we get the grant money, how can we spend some of our money to get these projects on the ground faster rather than later? That's some of the issues that we're currently facing right now. We had a major fatality off of Santa Ana Boulevard. The residents were coming asking us we're like, look, we're going to have your infrastructure, but it's not coming to 2020. We have a grant, but we won't be able to get to you to 2020, right? They don't want to hear that. And so we have to figure out a way, how can we expedite that? And so I'm wanting to bring that to your attention. And then lastly, as we look at our civic center and looking at a civic center master plan, we have our state government here. They have a building that's vacant. Who can we speak to talk about as we're having conversations about creating a civic center master plan in partnership, and what are they going to do with that building? It's vacant. And so, we want to use them as a partner, but who do we communicate? Because essentially that becomes a surplus land. And I'm not sure why they decided to move. Is that building, is there asbestos? This is not reinforced, I don't know so we would like to know why they left that building. And so if you all can help us with that, we greatly appreciate it.
Quickly to Councilmember Sarmiento, your comments about a proactive approach at the state level. We have been working with your staff to identify a significant ask, leveraging your elected officials. And there's a couple opportunities that we see since it's Governor Brown's last year, whether it's through the budget, whether it's SB1 revenues, whether it's cap and trade. There's quite a few opportunities where there's revenue available at the state, and we want that ask to come through this year. So we're still working on what that project can be and where we can attach it to, but absolutely something that's in the works, absolutely a great thing that we'll want you to talk about when you're up in Sacramento. We're still trying to nail down what the details are, but we're certainly working towards that.
Thank you, Corey.
I would add quickly, because you mentioned a lot of things being bleak, another bright spot, just a reminder, we've been working on with staff, but after all the talk about park bond, they did approve a park bond. It's on the June ballot, and if there's any indication about the level of confidence it's going to pass, the governor put like $1 billion is programmed into his budget, assuming the park bond. It's $4 billion, $2.5 billion for park programs, $1.5 billion for water. So we're working with staff on both like a water infrastructure opportunity, and then on the parks. And the parks will be more. You have a great parks department. They've just had, of all the clients we have, great success in putting together good projects. But in addition to like kind of the formula competition stuff or the formula stuff you'll get, there'll be some competitive programs. Corey and Casey worked hard. There's a special fund for the Santa Ana River improvements. It has $12 million in it with stuff we've steered to make sure Santa Ana hopefully gets more than their fair share, which is not something everyone else in the state gets. And as you may know, the bond obviously just creates the opportunity to borrow a huge chunk of money with some parameters, but a lot of details still to be filled in, and the legislature still has to appropriate the money. They don't go spend $4 billion, so Casey will be leading our charge with all the budget legislation and trailer bills where there are clever ways to fill in, like the Santa River. Could there be trailer bill, work with Daily, that kind of says they're going to put X money from the river thing into the budget for cities that start with the letter S and then the letter A, those kind of things to, so we will proactively be all over that, working in conjunction with your team. And
Just on the riverbed, something to include, because I know that plan is fairly old during, Assembly Member Lou Correa at the time. That's a pretty old plan. The thing that I would just caution us and possibly put in there, and even though, I try to think regionally, not just, local, is that sediment is a huge problem, right? And as you look at sea rise, and you're looking at what's happening within the coastal cities, has going to have a huge impact on us here. And will we have enough sediment really to help continue to have sand in beach areas? Sea rise is alive and well, and UCI was with them yesterday, and these are like the experts of experts that have been doing this research, and they're saying there's a possibility that we may run out of sediment's going to be a huge issue. And right now, most of the sediment we're getting is from the riverbed, right? And that's why I'm making mention. And so what we do and how we do it moving forward could have unintended consequences for coastal cities, and we need to keep that in mind.
I think one thing encouraging, I believe there's even some reference to ocean sea rise or issues about the ocean in this bond that kind of got put in. So the beauty of it is, and having a coordinated strategy is, maybe some of that funding issue could come through one element of the water side.
Yeah,
like
and you can get their
Conservancy,
data, they have it
versus
available.
you still have money for improvement for trails or parks along it, and then still separate money for, let's say, your water infrastructure is kind of the way we'll game it, or how maybe we might ally with the water district if there's an element. I think the key thing is not let people say, "Ooh, the water district had all this money for sediment stuff in the river, so Santa Ana was covered." Not let them do that.
Yeah. Well, with that, thank you. And so, those are the types of, I guess, updates on the specific things like, what you mentioned, Corey, Casey, and Chris, and those things are going to be very good for us to go ahead and report out and just keep on top of. So with that, we'll move on to the next item, and I believe that's yours, Jorge. That's reviewing and discussing the legislative scorecard. And I know you, we gave you all of a few minutes to go ahead and wrap that whole thing up.
More than enough. More than enough. This one will be very brief. So the 2017 scorecard is really our scorecard, how we did last year. This year we did change the format a little bit. We wanted to add more detail. So staff did a really good job of putting together our accomplishments. That being said, and I'll kind of dovetail into number 6, if that's okay with the chair, we changed the platform for 2018. We received a lot of feedback from this committee, as well as from the entire city council, on wanting us to be a little bit more nimble, but then also more focused. So you will notice that the 2018 platform does look substantially different, not just in the layout and the look of it, but also we wanted to be more direct. We did not want it to be the 50,000 foot level. We wanted to get a little bit more granular and get specific to Santa Ana's needs. So you will notice that we tried to do a lot more deliberate focus on that. One of the things that we did this year is we did one-on-one meetings with each of the department heads. So we wanted to meet specifically with the department heads, not just the line staff, and get a real understanding of what they're hearing, because the elected officials are meeting directly with them. So we wanted to make sure that there was a closer connection.
They did hear everything I said because it's on there.
So you will see that we were a little bit more focused, but hearing obviously what the committee focused on today, one of the things that I would like to do is maybe have a one page of some of the items that were highlighted today, so that we can talk about a 2018 priorities, and then the other items still have them be priorities, but more ongoing priorities, so that we can really give both our state and federal advocates, but then also our elected officials, these are our top 5 items, but then this is the rest of the platform. So with your agreement, we can go ahead and revise that so that we can still get this to the full city council, get it adopted. One of the things that you will notice in the 2018 platform at the very front is there's always been this vague ambiguity as to how we take legislative positions. So we wanted to make it a little bit more clear. So we outlined that, and also the options, because some of our elected officials, especially newer elected officials, or even members of the public, don't know that there's more than just a support or oppose position. There's other nuances among that. So we wanted to, one, provide that information to the public, but two, outline how it is that we're going to be issuing letters of support or opposition, what authority the mayor has, the city manager has, under what conditions would we confer with this board, or under what circumstances would we want the entire council to weigh in. So we did outline that to give us a little bit more direction, make it clear, and in the event that the mayor doesn't sign an item for whatever reason, the mayor pro tem would be able to do so, or the city manager in the event that we needed to do something a little bit more urgently. So we wanted to give ourselves some flexibility. And obviously we still kept all of our guiding principles the same, since the city council went through a fairly extensive exercise in creating the original platform about 4 years ago.
So Jorge, let me just interrupt you really quickly. So we're just talking about platform issues that involve state or federal issues, right?
Correct.
Not any of our locally, local issues that we're still deliberating that we have as, as matters that are before us. Let's say like citizens review boards, something like that.
Correct. Those would not be in here.
Okay.
We do have overarching items, some things that are a little broader in sense, but for the most part, we try to get a lot more specific. What I really wanted to do is I wanted to make the scorecard, when we're done with this at the end of the year, a useful document for the council, almost what you're referring to, rather than on the monthly basis. The original thought was our year-end scorecard should really tell you performance measures, not just activities. Activities are great, and we've done a fantastic job outlining them, but we wanted to give you what is the performance. If you're looking for us to support legislation and have it approved, did we get there? Did we not? What were the metrics? What did our lobbyists do? What did our staff do? How many trips did we take to D.C. or Sacramento? So we're trying to make it a more useful document, but we've heard the feedback, and we can make some adjustments.
Just one thing, I think, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem, but on the third item on the first page on community safety, enhancing public trust, and I would add enhancing public trust and accountability. So I know there's legislation that could be overarching, that's state, federal, that would affect us locally. So maybe if we can include that language.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then on that note, on the outreach and engagement, the citizenship ceremony. And then as well, what I wanted to include was a legislative update from our legislators. So having that part of our, introduction somewhere, or part of our engagement strategy. But I think it's important that we have our legislators come and give us an update. I know Senator Nguyen always makes that effort, but we have yet to hear from Assemblymember Tom Daly, or, Lou, I'm going to give him a break. He just got elected, so, he's on his second year. But, they need to come and, present as well, whether it's either to this committee or coming to the full council. I know Senator Nguyen has made a practice to come before the entire council, and she's been really the only legislator that I've known in my time that has actually done that and been consistent. And when I saw her a week ago, she says, "Hey, look, I'm trying to figure out a date when I can come out and provide, an update." And she typically comes out during budget time to all her various cities. And so you'll be hearing from her soon. We should definitely try to hear from our other congressional members as well.
We'd be happy to do that. One of the things we've been...
And incorporate this and institutionalize it so that we know that they need to come quite frequently and give us updates.
We'd be happy to do that.
And our supervisor, exactly. Yeah, we forget about him. And then just lastly, how can we, for transparency purposes and accountability purposes, and I know Jack is working on finalizing our website and our dashboard, but how do we have a legislative dashboard so that we could keep track of and monitor what you're saying, not just in this report format, but where we actually can show value for our, state lobbyists and our federal lobbyists. This is how much money they are bringing back to our community. This is why we have these lobbyists, right? So we can account to that, put dashboards, whether it's, parks and recreation, whether it's public safety, on and so forth. Because I don't think a dashboard for legislative issues was brought to Jack's attention.
Yeah, we'd be happy
Great,
to do
thank
that. One of the things that we have done over the last year is we now meet quarterly with all of our legislative offices, so including the supervisor's office. So we're trying to remend some of the relationships at the staff level and really encourage additional participation. And so far, we've had great success. Our letters of support for grants and for other initiatives has shortened rather than waiting months to get a response. We're now getting them back in days. So it's been great, and working with TPA and H&K has been helpful.
So does that take us through 5 and 6? Is that
Yes.
what that did? Well, I think on that note, Jorge, I think you're right. I think you guys do a very good job reaching out, and we really appreciate it because you do have more, personal, intimate contact with, staffs across the street in Sacramento and DC. But really, it's their responsibility, I think, like the Mayor Pro Tem said, for them to extend, their support because we're their constituency, right? It's like us going to a neighborhood meeting and we're accountable directly to the residents. They're accountable to us as electeds within their districts and all their respective districts. So to Senator Wynn's credit, she's always made herself available. And we may not agree on everything, but she's always been at least willing to come and address us. But I haven't heard from any others. So that's not, I don't think that's the best way to govern. But then again, look, I'll go ahead and just set that aside. But I just think it's it's something that's incumbent upon them. But to the extent we can say we make ourselves available, and there's a forum for you to come and address us on specific issues that you need help with, that you may want to hear from us that we need help with. I mean, look, it just makes sense. So, anyways, okay, thank you for that. We're moving on to item number 7, which is the citywide communications, and this is something that I wanted to place on the agenda. So basically, I just wanted to hear from staff and an update on where we are on the search, on finding somebody either in-house, outside to address communications now that it's one of the subject matter areas for this committee. And I wanted to open it up to the committee just to give some comments and some recommendations as well.
Sure, Mr. Chair, thank you. There was a recruitment that started before I got here. The panel eventually interviewed everybody, made a recommendation of 2 individuals. We interviewed them, and there was one person right now that we have as a finalist. We're in the process of negotiations, and part of the delay is has to do with the work schedule, and so if we're going to go down an alternate work schedule, then we need to have an internal policy. And so we've been developing an internal policy to see if we can make that work. If that doesn't help, then we're thinking of maybe pursuing a contract relationship, either with this individual or others. But that's where we're at. Out of all the candidates, I think there's really only one that would work for us. And we're excited about that particular individual at this point. We're going to see if we can actually put a deal together that makes it work for her and for us.
Mayor Pro Tem, any questions?
Yes, thank you. Before I get to your, I totally forgot one item, and I'm glad that they're still here. In regards to earthquake retrofit and earthquake initiative, it's not if, it's when the big one is coming. And certainly, our city hall is not reinforced, and we have some major issues, very similar to San Bernardino City Hall is all I'm going to say. And their cost to retrofit that building was $25 million. They ended up moving from their city hall to a business park. And so I just wanting to figure out, because I know the state has funding, and obviously the city is not in a financial position, but we do need to take action, and we need to do that fairly soon, especially as our city manager is a civil engineer. Don't want to lose your license, sir. The other is just, if you all can come back to us, I think this is a sense of urgency, and figure out ways where we possibly can look and tap into some dollars would be greatly appreciated, and with next steps as we move towards a civic center master plan and what that possibly can look like. And I know that's a phased approach, but I think we need to address the big gorilla in the room first before we can take these other steps. And so we need to identify what those possible steps are going to be, and they're all financial constraints. And so I just wanted to bring that to your guys' attention. And on the citywide communications, I would just share with you, Mr. City Manager, is that this is probably one of the most important positions that you will hire. And the reason being is how we communicate, what we say, how we say it, when we say it, where we say it, and what platform we communicate is extremely vital. Everyone now has, a smartphone. There's rare few people that don't have that, and this is how we're communicating. Most of social media, the amount of hits that you're receiving on Facebook are like 1.2 billion, right? People on these systems, on Twitter, they're getting their news all on social platforms, right? So making sure that this person is very well versed is going to be imperative to our success and how we communicate with not just our constituents, our residents, but the business community and how we're able to attract business coming into the city, right? Storytelling is extremely powerful, and we need somebody that can be that storyteller to paint a narrative of Santa Ana, and being able to share that on various different mediums is going to be imperative. And I think this position needs to be unique. It can't be a traditional civil service job. We need to think of one where they have the flexibility to give us what we need. I think we need to get out of this traditional mindset that you're a government worker, you need to be here from 8 to 5 p.m. Obviously, things have changed. You can work remotely, and we need to encourage that moving forward, not just with this position, but possibly other positions. And, we don't provide daycare. I can see this in this room. Everybody has children. I mean, it's probably excluding for me. I don't have any kids. I'm not going to have any kids, but I love them, and I love your guys' kids. Obviously, there's a cost to that. We're not providing that. And so we need to be flexible, whether it's a male or female, giving them the opportunity to spend time with their children. And so if we're not providing daycare here on site at City Hall, we need to make sure that we're able to provide the flexibility for our employees to be able to work remotely, especially if they have young children or just had children. And I know this city hasn't moved in that direction. We lost someone recently, obviously she wanted to, spend more time with her child, and we definitely all respected that. But if we had other opportunities to provide, possibly could have stayed. And so the last thing that I want is for us that we have someone on board and they won't take the job because we're not being flexible. And so I just want to keep that in mind. This position is extremely important, and we need to bring somebody on board, like as of 2 weeks ago, a month ago.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And so just for a little bit more direction, I think that, what I'm fearful of is that, we continue talking, we don't resolve anything with this person, then we have to go out and search again. I hope we don't go out and search again, because it just delays this to the point where we're just, we're really flat-footed on things already. To some of the comments I think that I heard, and some of your comments, Mr. City Manager, I think we do need the support of maybe a firm that is maybe going to be an untraditional relationship with city staff and with the electeds. I think that's a relationship we have with the city attorney, and it's worked out well for years, right? It's a very unconventional way. She's not an in-house city attorney, but nonetheless the relationship works. And I think that person or persons that we retain as a communications firm or as a messaging firm really needs to have resources that we may not be familiar with, right? We're not good at this. In the 12 years that I've been here, we've been horrible at it. And we both served on many agencies, and they have really complex, sophisticated communication teams. And we just have always been information in, no information out. And we all get beat up. And I think to Mayor Pro Tem's point, we all don't get beat up equally. The people who get beat up are those that are the electeds, right? And so we've been harping on this issue, and it just hasn't happened. So I think under your regime here and your time here at the city, we hope that we can accomplish that. So my thing would be, look, a person sounds great. It sounds like, you interviewed and somebody seemed to have risen to the top. But I just think, we need a team. We need somebody who has resources that can help us. And I think it's worked out well for us in the city attorney's office. And I think this is even it's a different animal, like was said. So that's one comment. The other one is, what are we doing in the interim? I think somebody's absorbing that responsibility. But, look, everybody's so stretched already in doing their own, having their own responsibilities and obligations that things get lost. I got a lot of emails on a work study that we're having on, tenants' rights and rent control, and everything got blown up. That's because we didn't message well, right? That's because we didn't explain things well. This committee is just an example, a small sampling of what's wrong. There's no public here. Mm-hmm. This is supposed to be attended by the public. This is supposed to be something that the public is here to comment and observe and to opine. And, I think 90% of the subcommittees that I've been to are very thin, especially here. And you're right, the time is maybe not the most convenient, but nonetheless, we should at least message it better. So I just, want us to be better at this. And, we've said this has been our Achilles heel. And that's why we always stumble over ourselves and we're always reacting instead of like putting, our best foot forward. So, please, to the extent our next meeting is on March 28th, my expectation will be that we have somebody or, a firm here that represents us on that issue. So that would be just my comments to you, Mr. City Manager.
I certainly agree with you, Councilman Sarmiento, and I did forget to mention one important component beyond just the social media and the messaging and just basic communications is crisis communications, which we definitely lack. And we would definitely need somebody with that expertise, whether it's a law firm. And I do agree that if we don't decide to hire somebody in-house, I don't think it's that important. But if we're able to bring somebody on a hybrid level like Sonia, or even partnering up with her firm that provide other services because they have, folks that they're working with. So I think we need to be creative in what we can find and how are we able to match and work with one another based on the services that we currently have with her firm. And then I also just wanted to just end with this. And I think it's important for us to realize that as I talk about social media and I talk about not being able to engage our residents and not having anyone here, look, we have the platforms. You can go Facebook Live. Go to Facebook Live. You put that on there and our meetings for people, and then you report that 2-3 weeks. We're going Facebook Live with our legislative committee. You don't have to show up. You can comment. You can, put your comments. You can do Facebook Live. They can see us. That's the new way. And if not, you do a pop-up meeting. You go out in front of City Hall and Ross, and people are going to, what are you doing there? We have chairs. We got to start being creative to engage our community. They want that. And I just want to end because when I had a convening on SB 1000 for my job, look, residents showed up. And the most important thing they said, why do cities have such a difficult time in communicating with us? We don't get it. We don't understand why. And, and obviously, I had to tell them, look, we're just not good at it, and you need to continue to be pushing, but they're very frustrated. And so I just want to end with that is that we have the opportunity to be in their face in various ways. We're just not thinking outside the box, and we have to start doing it. So it doesn't matter what time or not time, we could always go Facebook Live. We could always go out into the community, and we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, you kind of heard us. And please don't misinterpret what I said by us being horrible at something. It's because, look, that's not any of our skill set, right? That's why we have to seek support outside. And so it's not meant to be a criticism of anybody's, capacity or anything. It's just we realize that there are skill sets that we need to bring in from the outside to help us, right? To help all of us do our job better. So I hope the comments were taken in that vein, you know, positively rather than negatively. So with that, that takes us to number 8 and an update on the 2017 schedule of federal awards.
This one is going to be real brief. You have the CIFA. It is audited. The big thing that I wanted to note is on the very last page, the total number. So you'll see the total of our expenditures for federal grants. Actually, there's a page missing.
Yeah,
it got
41
put on the back. So it's actually the very first page. You're going to see the total federal expenditures is 60 million.
I was like 41 didn't add to me. I was a
Yeah,
little
yeah. It
confused.
got put out of order somehow.
Thank
So
you.
apologies for that. Because it should have been the last page.
Okay.
That number is up from last year. Last year's was about 56 million. So the reason is we were very good at getting a lot of federal dollars over the last 2-3 years, and those dollars, the spend usually comes and has a 2 or 3 year lag. So now you're seeing the results of those dollars being spent. So as long as we continue securing federal dollars, these numbers should continue to increase. If due to the Trump administration and other factors we don't get that, then you'll start seeing that spend decrease, which of course will have impacts on the services the community receives, and ultimately if the employees that are funded through those are grant funded, then you'd have some impacts there as well.
This was very helpful, by the way, so thank you for doing this. It was really, really good. Jorge, I think you have the next one as well, taking positions on legislative bills.
This one, we won't have anything. We wanted to put that on there at the, I believe it was the request of Councilmember Sarmiento, is that we have the ability to take positions. So this will now be a recurring item in the future. Once we start seeing more things come up with legislation, you'll actually have, a report that will have everything that we've taken a position on. But then moving forward, the committee will be able to give staff input on anything that we should be taking positions on where the platform is silent.
And if I may also,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, just to mention that we have been getting numerous amicus requests, and our position has been consistent with the council's former direction, which is if there is an amicus request from a big city, we just got one in from Santa Clara and San Francisco on sanctuary cities, for example, so long as it is in your legislative platform, we have been going forward and filing or asking the city manager for authority to file as long as it's consistent. If that's still your desire in this year's decision, we can continue that, or we can put them on the closed session agenda.
So, I'll let Mayor Pro Tem give her thoughts on this. I don't see any reason why we should deviate, because we discussed this because we had to be rapid on some of these things and we didn't have time to go and wait till closed session. Some of them are very time sensitive. If we had all the time in the world, then we go through a whole deliberative process, but sometimes we can't. So I do think that, if we can't, the only thing I was going to add is that we need to advise the rest of the council what we're doing. So to the extent that when we update this, I just want to make sure our colleagues are aware that this is the path we've chosen and the rationale behind it, right? So we're not doing this so they don't think we're just acting arbitrarily and we're being capricious or trying to ignore their comments.
Absolutely. And to that point, one of the items that's in the policy in terms of how we take positions notes that every council member will receive a copy of every letter and the reports that we distribute. Mm-hmm. So if a council member asks to take a position on any item, regardless, if it's going on city letterhead, a copy will be provided to the entire council so that everyone's aware.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the last one is, I believe this one's yours, right, Maria? Unassigned? Oh, no, you don't want to put your name on this? Well, we'll give it to you.
It's unassigned at this moment. What you have before you is a draft policy.
Nobody wanted to touch this
Nobody
one, right?
wanted to touch it. That's exactly right. It's a collaborative effort of the three departments, the city attorney, the city manager, and the clerk's office. That there's an actual role for the clerk's office to receive any complaints that are filed. But as far as assigning it to a department, that department would take the lead in identifying perhaps investigators if that's needed, and bringing a staff report to the city council if that's needed. So depending on the nature of the allegation, there's some staff work that's involved. And so we're asking this committee if you would like to assign it to a certain department or if you'd like the full council to make that decision. But at this point, it's
like
up
you're
to the
default.
council.
I don't know, but No, but I'll open, I've got some comments on this, and I'll let Mayor Pro Tem go ahead and comment
Yeah,
first.
so, on this issue here, I know it's way overdue, but I think it's still missing some things. And so I would just ask our city attorney if you can, because I wasn't part of this legislative committee for the past 2 years, and I know this was brought up at city council recently. Council members has been asking about this and keeps on asking about this, and where are we? And so, the last thing that I want to do as we move forward with this policy, not have everything in place and then having to come back and forth. And so I would hope that as we look at all of this and we're looking at, sexual harassment policies, right now we did speak earlier just more on employees, but not on the city council. Right, and this is for city council, but as well, where is for the executive management and staff, right? There was a point in time where our former city manager didn't feel like these laws applied to him. And so we need to make sure that this applies to all the executive team, including the mayor and council. Obviously, there are, rules and regulations for lower level employees and how we not have them for executive management and or the mayor and council. And so some of that is missing. I think we need a comprehensive approach, and I would just urge us to, for us to complete that and bring this back. I don't think it needs to come back here. Maybe it can go to this, unless you think so, unless you have other comments. But this is way overdue. This is a year, 2 years. And so I just think that we need to move forward with it. And so those are just my comments.
No, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I know, I think the request to have this come before us and address some of the issues hasn't been 2 years. I think we haven't seen it in 2 years.
Okay.
I remember this was something that the original ethics committee, when it was a standalone committee, was trying to tackle, and then it backed off, right? I mean, because we were trying to put teeth into the code of conduct and to see whether we could censure, whether there would be a removal there was a bunch of different tiers of sanctions that we could apply. We were going to look at other cities and what they did, and that's when, it just kind of stalled, right? So I'm glad it's before us again. The reason why it was brought to us, I still don't understand, but be careful what you wish for, right? Because I want some things included in here that are going to be pretty onerous, right? And I think the sexual harassment stuff has to be in there. The disclosure of relationships has to be in there. The application to electeds, EMT, and appointees as well. So we're talking about our commissioners and our board members as well. It should be that broad, but also to talk about people that could be exposed to censure and sanctions, people who've received former FPPC fines and offenses, right? Whether you're a lobbyist, disclosures, making sure that those disclosures are included in here, and also people who are using former employees, right, that are getting access to city information, sensitive documents. I mean, all those things I think are important for us to have as elements of this. If we're gonna take this seriously, then I want it to make sure that it has very extensive tentacles. So, I would hope, just not to contradict Mayor Pro Tem, but I think because we're really broadening this, and I do expect to have it much more broad than how it was presented, and again, because you brought it for us as it was, I think we need to work on it maybe once here with some of those ancillary issues that we just spoke about, and then we can return it back to the council, for all of us to comment.
And I forgot one other group that we missed is our contractors. We have a lot of contractors, and there's a lot of these contractors that find themselves in trouble, and we never hear about that because we don't have a process. And I'm still very concerned in how we actually manage our contractors, and so I just wanted to make sure that we put them in.
My only comment here is maybe what we could do, because to move this
The security contract.
would the committee consider holding a special meeting just to look at this item? Maybe just, of course, we'd have a meeting in public, but we would maybe be able to take drafts and really work on it and if we wanted to, rather than wait for your next quarterly meeting, or is it waiting for your next quarterly meeting?
Look, I think that you probably have a long laundry list of other work study sessions that we're going to be covering. Take a look at it. If you see that, this can be done quickly, I doubt that just because there's so much before us. Budget, dealing with all the other negotiations that are going to be coming before us, just so many issues. This is obviously one of them, but do we leapfrog it in front of things that you've already been working on? I don't think that we want to do that either. I think we have a venue and a forum for us to be able to tackle it. I'd rather us bring it back here just because of your timing. If you see that, hey, all the work is done on everything else and you've got some free time and you can tackle this one, I'm very, supportive. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the change in terms of it applying to the other directly appointed officials, and there's 3 of us to the council, those are easy fixes. Now, applying to all the EMT, that's really coming into the employment relationship. We can still do it. I may need to talk to the city manager about how we do that and how we get them to sign it, et cetera, et cetera.
I was talking about the appointed commissioners and board members as well.
It already applies to the appointed commissioners, but what it didn't, or what some people argued it didn't apply to were the 3 of your appointees.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to
I think
include 2.
at least 2 of your appointees, and I think this one probably as well. I have no problem signing it.
Right.
In fact, I think I already signed a copy of it originally. I think Maria did
You and
too.
Maria did.
Of the sexual
Right.
harassment?
This
How profound we want to go on this, on the levels. Look, we'll look to you all, and you can give us direction, and say, look, we can't go beyond this level because it's going to interfere with personnel issues. But let us know. So.
Right. I was just reading the title of the policy here. Council censure of conduct policy to enforce ethics policy. It seems to be council focused, but I think it's
Too narrow.
right. We can
That was the
certainly-
direction of the previous committee, to have it only apply to council members or elected officials, and that it would not actually be open to the public to file complaints on the council members, that it would be a council member to a council member. So, of course, we had to navigate that water very carefully, but that was the direction of the former council.
See, and that's
Of
why
the
I think
council
this,
committee,
Yeah,
sorry.
this needs some work because it looks like it could be a punitive measure or it could be a political thing, right? One council member disagrees with another, so I'm going to bang you over the head with this. That's what we don't want it to be, right? To the extent we can avoid that we don't want this to be a blunt instrument that we're using against one another, because we're going to have these ethics violations flying back and forth. So, to the extent that we can bring back models that encompass, again, electeds, appointeds, some of our high-level staff, our executive staff, then I think that those are
Okay,
fair.
so just for clarification purposes, when the Code of Ethics was first implemented and discussed, they felt that it was a values-based policy at the time. Now, based on this policy, that the directive is now to have some sanctions in place for that, for those that sign the policy, which are the appointed officials, your appointed officials, and the council members.
Maybe, right?
Okay.
So that's still the open question, right? I think that's how this one was drafted. I think there may have been some discussion from a council member that wants to have some punitive measures incorporated into this. The council may or may not support that. So to the extent we can have some options and alternatives, do we want to go down that path or do we want to do something
And I
different?
think I agree with that. And I think one of the things that I talked to the city clerk about is I drafted one version of this that looked different from the way this one, because everybody has their opinions and every council member has. And we may reach a point where we take it to the council with all the things we presented. We had a really good sample from the city of LA. We had a really good sample from the city of San Jose. And that way maybe the council has a full review and it doesn't look like we've designed some punitive policy.
Right.
And that's the only choice you get.
And the last thing that I just mentioned is the sunshine ordinance and implementing this in this as well. And where are we at? How have we been monitoring that? And is our staff in compliance? Is the city council in compliance? And I'm gonna just be quite honest with you that I know that there are current staff members and council members having meetings that are not ending up on city agenda on their calendar. And so we need to where is that stick? And so just, making sure that is included. We don't create a law and then not have, a law that's being monitored. And so what is that? And at what point in time do you get those investigation powers as a city attorney without the approval of the city manager to go ahead and make investigation? Because at this moment in time, you cannot go and move forward with an investigation without the authority of the city manager. And there may have to be a change in that, just for the mere fact that there our relationships with council members and city managers as we had in the past, and saying you're going to do this, not do this, instead of us just following what the law is and what the ordinance is. We tend to bypass all of that, and we need to make sure that we have folks that are able to, comply with this and giving you the tools to go and make sure that we're in compliance.
I appreciate that comment, because sometimes we do not realize what we have until we read our charter. What's really interesting is the city attorney is charged in a number of documents of the responsibility to do certain things. But our charter actually says that it's only the city manager and or the city council that has the authority to authorize investigation. And that's interesting, because in your charter, you have to eventually change that. And so what I've had to do in the past, where I felt an investigation was warranted either from a complaint, from a community member, or an employee, I had to go to the city manager and ask for permission to open up the investigation with the resources, which is interesting because, on occasion that authority wasn't provided for whatever the reasons might have been. And so that is something I think we need to address if you want consistency.
Yeah.
I also think it's really interesting that we have someone that the county just hired who specializes in this. I know that some other cities and counties do cross-contracting with each other. It's almost like, what is that called in law enforcement? Mutual aid. There's no cost to it. It's just like a mutual aid package where they work together because, I may say, it's not the most comfortable thing to do to investigate my own council member, so I'm going to do mutual aid, and then vice versa, we do mutual aid to the other potential agency. And that's a concept that's growing right now out there. So something we may want to talk about.
Thank you. And before we wrap up, any final thoughts?
I have to get going.
Yeah. And we're only half hour off, but see, what I wanted to say before we adjourn, I wanted to thank you, staff, for doing all the good work and presenting us all this information. Maybe what we do on the next agenda is we try to be time sensitive, and we realize, look, we may not be able to cover everything. So if we have to put some things over to a following meeting, we're fine with that. But all right.